Welcome to our video tutorial on how to create single subject design graphs using GraphPad Prism 7. Today we're going to teach you how to create our mock graph that combines elements of the multiple baseline design, multi-element design, reversal design, as well as combining different types of data such as scatter and line plot that overlay bar charts. If you haven't already, please open the mock graph Prism data table file in Prism and the mock graph exemplar to use as a model as you create your working graph in Prism. You'll notice in Prism there are 3 data tables and 3 graphs, and each of these correspond to the panels in our mock graph: clinic, home, and school. Within the data table, for example in clinic, you'll notice that the first column refers to our x-axis data, sessions, and everything to the right refers to the y-axis data. In this case, we have 3 dependent measures: self-injurious behavior, or SIB, pica, and item engagement. You'll also notice that we've separated out SIB and pica in terms of their phases. And you'll notice that we start the new column at session 4, which corresponds to the first data point of competing items phase. The reason we do this is because, unlike in Microsoft Excel, where you could simply right-click this data point and remove the line in between sessions 3 and 4 that crosses the phase change, it's not as easy to do that in Prism. The easiest way to avoid that line that crosses the phase change is to simply insert data into a new column anytime there's a phase change. You'll also notice that the final column in our data table refers to the third dependent measure, item engagement, which is our vertical bar chart data that refers to the secondary y-axis on our graph. You'll also notice that in Prism there are 3 graphs, and these are linked to the data table, such that anytime you enter data within the data table, it's going to auto-populate within the graph. To see what I mean, let's go ahead and click Clinic under Graphs, and we'll go ahead and select Points and Connecting Line, the second option, and click OK. And you can see that Prism automatically sourced all the data from the data table Clinic into a graph. Before I get any further, I should mention that there are multiple ways of accomplishing the same task within Prism. I'm going to default to double-clicking most of the features on the graph, such that we open a new window that allows us to access all the different changes we might want to make for that particular aspect of the graph. However, you should know that there might be more efficient or easier ways for you to edit the same kind of aspect of the graph based on your own preference. So you can simply right-click, and there's a drop-down menu for most features in Prism. You can go to the top menu to access similar features, or you could use hotkeys by using a corresponding key with the Control key on a Windows computer or the Command key on a Mac computer. We're going to go ahead and double-click the y-axis now, and this will open a new window that's called Format Axes. And you'll notice 5 tabs here. There's Frame and Origin, X, Left Y, Right Y axes, and Titles and Fonts. But we're going to begin with the first one, Frame and Origin. The first thing we want to do under Shape, Size, and Position is adjust the size of the graph to match that of the mock graph. Make sure under this drop-down menu you select Custom, which allows us to change the aspect ratio of the graph. We're going to type in 6 for the width and 2.5 for the height. For thickness of axes, let's make sure we select half point, and that's going to be the thickness of all lines within this video tutorial. The last thing we want to do is under Frame Style, we'll select the drop-down menu and select Offset X and Y axes, and you can see what this essentially does is break the X and Y axes apart. And what that will allow us to do is use the floating 0 feature that you might use in Microsoft Excel by using a negative number as the minimum value of your y-axis. But in this case, offsetting the x and y-axes allows us to simply drag up the y-axis so that we float those 0 points above the x-axis such that those points do not lie directly on the line for the x-axis. So when we're done, we could click apply, and you can see those changes take effect in your mock graph that's working graph. Next, we'll select x-axis. And for all these axes, we're going to deselect automatically determine the range and interval first. That allows us to affect the range and the tick marks past the custom values that Prism sets for us. So for minimum of the x-axis, we're going to type in 0.5, and what that does is remove the 0 because we don't have a session 0, we start at session 1. And for the maximum, we're going to go down here and see what the maximum should be, which is 16 on our mock graph. So we'll type in 16. The other thing we want to do is, under major tick intervals, we're going to make sure this switches to 2 if it doesn't automatically do so. And we'll click apply. And you can see this looks similar to the bottom x-axis. The last thing we're going to do for this first panel is we're going to take out the tick labels that fall in the first and the second panels here, and we're going to re-add them when we create our third panel. So to do that, under all ticks, location of numbering / labeling, we're going to select none and click apply. And now you'll notice that it takes away the tick labels. The final thing I want to show you while we're on the x-axis tab here is if you weren't making a multiple baseline design and you were simply adding phase changes into like a reversal design, all you would have to do under additional ticks and grid lines to program phase lines in is under at x equals, you would just type in, for example, 3.5, select the line, and click apply to add a phase change line. And to edit the aesthetics of that phase change line, you could click the ellipsis or the 3 dots under details, and you could change the style and the thickness of that line, or you could simply right click it on the graph. If you, along with me, typed this value in, go ahead and delete that and deselect the line and click apply to remove that line, because what we're going to do is draw in these connecting elbow lines for our multiple baseline design. I should also note that you could do something similar for the left or y axis to draw in criterion lines that appear horizontally on your graph. All right, let's move on to the left y axis. Again, we're going to deselect this first option, and then we're going to look at the minimum and maximum on our mock graph, which is 0 to 6. So we'll type in 6 for our maximum. And for major tick intervals, if it doesn't automatically go to 2, make sure that you enter 2 in there. And we'll click apply. Next, we'll go to right y-axis. And right now it says no right y-axis. We'll go to the drop-down menu and click on standard. Again, we'll deselect this option. And we want it to be 0 to 100. So we'll change the maximum to 100. And if it doesn't already change to something like 20, we'll go ahead and type in 20 for the major tick intervals, and we'll click apply. And now we'll see that new secondary y-axis appear. Finally, we'll go to the last tab, titles and fonts. And if you were just creating a one-panel graph, you might just go ahead and edit the y and x descriptors. But if you'll notice on our mock graph, we basically have one y, secondary y, and x-axis descriptor for all 3 panels. So we're going to go ahead and deselect all of these options here and click apply to remove the additional text. And now we could click OK. Next, what we want to do is edit the actual data points themselves. And to do that, we'll just double click on any data point, and it'll open a new format graph window. Now under dataset, you can go to this drop-down menu and change all the data sets at once. But what we'll do is we'll change each one at a given time. So for baseline SIB, let's make sure that SIB matches the one on our mock graph, and that's black circles. It appears that that one does show up as black circles already. So we'll go to Dataset and Pica. Now these appear as black squares instead of white circles. So we'll go ahead and change the appearance of these. First, we'll change the shape, and we'll select this open circle here. And you'll notice it truly is open. It makes it transparent. So in order for the white to appear above the gray bar charts we'll add in later, we're going to go to Color and select A1, which is white. And then we'll click Apply. I should note that you could also change the size and the border color, the border thickness, etc. here, as well as you could change the style of the line that connects the data plots. All right, next we will go to Competing Items SIB. Again, this appears as a black triangle, so we'll change this to a black circle and click Apply. And now for Competing Items Pica, we want this again to appear as an open circle that is white, and we'll click Apply. Finally, we'll go to Item Engagement, and the first thing we'll do is deselect both Show Symbols and Show Connecting Line, and we'll select Show Bars. And this allows us to change it from a scatter and line plot to a vertical bar chart. For color, let's select C1, which is a lighter gray. And for width, let's select a slightly wider vertical bar chart, such as width of 7. And for border color, let's go ahead and make this C1 as well. The last thing we'll do is we'll plot this on the right y-axis at the very bottom under Additional Options and click Apply. Now you can see that all of the data plots look pretty similar to the intended data plots on the mock graph. So we'll click OK. And now what we want to do is move our legend out of the way. So what we could do is, you'll notice that there are additional legend labels for baseline and baseline pica. So we'll click each of these and then just click the delete button to get rid of them, as we only need 3 legend labels. And what we could do is, if you hold down the control button on your computer and click each of these, you should be able to select each one and move them all at once. So I'm going to use the down arrow on my key and just move these out of the way. You can also use your mouse to move them, or you can move each one. And what we'll do is, now we'll adjust the different axes so that they look similar to our mock graph. So what we'll do is we'll extend this x-axis a little bit to be closer to the edge. And you can kind of just click down and drag these blue squares so that they match our mock graph. And you can see our y data that is 0 is floating a little higher than what we actually want it to float. So we'll select our primary y-axis and just drag this down a little bit. And you can kind of just play around with this until it looks to be at the height that you desire. So I'm going to drag this up a little bit until I think that looks pretty good. The other thing we don't want is for our vertical bar chart data to float above the x-axis. We want it to connect down to the x-axis. So we'll just click on the y-axis, the secondary y-axis, and pull this down until it is connecting to the x-axis. All right, so let's go ahead and finish this panel up by simply creating the legend as the last element. And what we'll do is we can just double click on this text and it'll allow us to edit it. And instead of saying competing items SIB, we'll type in self-injurious behavior. If you've created a graph in Prism before, Prism nicely enters a bunch of different options for you to choose from based on your previous legend labels. So you can see I've used self-injurious behavior before. I'm just going to go ahead and select this. But if you haven't had that option, you could just type it in. Again, with pica, we'll just delete competing items pica, and we'll keep item engagement the same. Next, what we need to do is create this white box. And so we'll go up to this top menu And under Draw, if you don't already see the rectangle, just click the down arrow and select Rectangle. And what we'll do is just simply draw the box in to be one that would encompass our legend. So this looks about right for me. I'm going to let go. And what we'll do is just double click this, and we'll change the thickness to 1/2 point and the fill to A1, which is white. I should also note that a nice feature on here is, say you create this box for this graph, you can click Set as Default and click OK, and what that'll do is anytime you create another box like this, it'll automatically make it look similar to this one. In this case, it would be thickness of 1/2 point and filled in white. Next, what we'll do is you can either hold down Control and select each one of these, or you could just click down and drag to select all 3 legend labels. And we'll just right click and we will go Send to Front. And the reason we're doing this is that it allows us to bring the text in front of the white box. Now what we'll do is you could either click down and move your legend into this box, or you could just move the legend box over your text and kind of play around with the size of it a little bit to adjust it to look correct. Now what we'll do is you can either hold down Control to add all of these together, or you can again just kind of select all of them with a box, and you'll notice that we've selected all the legend labels and the legend box. And next what you can do is right click and select Group. Again, you can see the hotkey is Control G. And this makes it into a unified legend box that you can move around and everything will move with it. So we'll just go ahead and click and move, and we'll move this into a similar position as our mock graph. Now our legend is done. So we've basically gotten our entire first panel done, and so now we need to work on the second and third panel. The good thing about Prism is once you create one graph panel, it's really easy to create the second and third panels. So what we'll do is we'll click on Home, and again we'll just select the second option and click OK, and then we'll go to School, select the second option and click OK. Now what we'll do is by holding the Control key down, if you're already selected School, just click on Home, and you'll see this new window pop up where it shows what graphs are selected, Home and School. What we'll do is select this little magic wand feature up here, and you'll see this new window come open that says Magic Step 1. And what this is asking you to do is to select what graph you want these new home and school graphs to look like. You can select the other graph that's in this project, so like clinic, or if you've created a different graph in a separate Prism file, you can go ahead and jump to that project as well using this feature. So we'll click Next, and now you'll see step 2 where it shows the graph you're basing it on and the 2 graphs that you're changing. So you could see home and school here. Now you can see all the different properties that you want to change to match your example graph. We're going to keep all of these selected, but again, if you only want to change some things like the aesthetics of the graph size, you could do that, or just the appearance of the different data plots, you could do that as well. So we'll go ahead and click OK, and now you can see it changes the second and third graph. And to get back to each individual graph, you could either just click on the respective tab, or you could just double click on the graph you want to select. Alright, what we'll do for this second graph, home, is we're basically just going to select each of these legend items and delete them because we don't need an additional legend. And then we'll go to the school, we'll do the same thing, and then the last thing we're going to do is double click the x-axis. And if you remember, we removed the tick labels for the first panel, but we want to add them back in. So under location of numbering and labeling, we'll select below and horizontal and click apply and OK. And now all of these graphs are ready to combine. So it's also really easy, especially as compared to Microsoft Excel, to combine graphs using the layout feature in Prism. So just click the layout folder and you'll see this new window open. And here what you could see is these are all the different types of pre-loaded layouts that you can make within Prism. You can also custom make a layout by changing the number of graphs and columns and rows. For our purposes, we're just going to select this 3-panel one here that matches our mock graph. And we'll also go down to this graphs or placeholders. If you have this default one that's placeholders, what you basically do is just drag the graphs into the open layout. But given we've already created the graphs in the order they're supposed to appear, we'll select fill the layout with graphs, and let's make sure that it selects clinic first. So basically what this will do is fill the panels in terms of the order you selected, clinic, home, and school, which is what we want. And then we'll click OK. So now you can see that all 3 panels are appearing how we want them to look in the order we want them to be in. Now what we want to do is place the kind of final touches on our graph. Before we go any further, let's make sure that all of our graphs are aligned appropriately. So it looks like this 3rd panel is slightly moved to the right as compared to the 2nd and 3rd panel, or excuse me, the 1st and 2nd panel. So again, you can click down and select all of these graphs, or you can just hit like Control A to select all. And what we want to do is align them. So up here, for the layout, these are basically all the keys that you might want to use to make graphs look consistent on this page. And so what we'll do is under this bottom left window, we'll select Align, and we'll do Align Y-axes. And now you can see that these are all lined up. 2 things that I want to show you before we go on is sometimes Prism will create a graph on one of these that is slightly larger than the other 2. So for example, say this graph is this big and we want it to be, we want all the graphs to be similar. What we would do is again select all, and we would go to this equalize under change. It says equalize scaling factors. We'll click that and you can see this new window pop up. And you have a couple options here. You can reduce the size of this larger graph to be similar to the 2 bottom graphs. You could increase the size of the 2nd and 3rd graph to match the size of the 1st, or you could just have a uniform percentage size for each graph. What we'll do is just reduce this graph size to match what it originally was. We'll click OK. The other thing I want to show you is, for some reason, if you moved a graph and you have these different spacings in between your 1st and 2nd panel as compared to your 2nd and 3rd panel, what you would do is just select all, and then under arrange, there's another equalize feature, and this is equalizing the spacing between objects. And so you'd click on this and do vertically, and this would put equal spacing in between your graphs. If for some reason your graphs are centered off on your page, what you do is again select all and then click center everything on the page, which is the top right feature. Alright, so if your graph is centered, everything's aligned, and there's equal spacing between all of the objects, now what we could do is draw in our multiple baseline lines. Again, what I mentioned is you could program these lines in earlier on, but the easiest way for a multiple baseline design is to draw them in. So under draw, you'll select the down arrow and you're going to select these elbow lines. And to draw these in, you just click wherever you want them to start. And if you hold down Shift, it's going to make your line straight, just as it would on one of the Microsoft Office programs. And we'll try to get this where there's equal spacing above and below the line, kind of right in the dead center of the space between the first and second graph. And we'll just let go and it'll form the line. You can play around with the line if you want by just clicking and adjusting the line. You can adjust how tall it is, as well as the width of your connecting line here. So I'm going to deselect it around that point, and it looks like it's a little too far out. I'm going to bring this back a little bit. And then let's double click this, make sure it's half point thickness. It looks like it is. We'll click OK. And then what we could do is just copy and paste. So you can either right click and do copy, or you can do Control C. And then again, you could right click and paste, or you could use the hotkey Control V. And what we'll do is we'll just kind of line these up to connect them and just drag this down a little bit. And instead of creating another one of these lines, we just want one solid line without an elbow to it. So to do that, we'll go back up to Draw, and we'll select the first one, which is Draw a Line. Again, if you hold down the Shift key, you can draw a straight line. And we'll just end this about here and deselect. If for some reason your lines are kind of crossing over one another, they don't look like they're just seamlessly connecting, you can kind of play around with them, and we'll go ahead and move on. So the last thing we need to do is create all the text for these phase lines, as well as the text for the axis labels and this little arrow legend here that indicates that it appears this client was sick at this time of this low point. So first, let's go ahead and create the text. So I find the easiest way is just to go up here and select this first option to select the text box. You could just click anywhere, and we'll type in baseline. And you could click again, and you deselect the text. We'll want to make sure it's not bold, and this should be about size 20. If you didn't already select that, you could either go here, or you could choose to increase or decrease the size there. We'll just kind of move this to the center of the phase, and then we'll just copy and paste. And you'll notice when you go to move these objects around, you'll see these dotted lines. That just indicates that Prism's trying to help you center and align them. So it's trying to align it with your previous text box. And we'll just double click here and type in competing items. And we'll click away and then kind of drag this to be centered within this phase. If for some reason these are not aligned, like baseline is a little bit lower, you can just click on both of them and use the align feature that we talked about and just do align top. Alright, and so now we want to insert clinic, home, and school. So what we'll do is, again, you can add in new text, or you can just copy and paste. So we'll click on here, we'll copy, paste, and we'll type in clinic, and we'll just click the underline key and click away, and we'll copy and paste down here. We'll just double click this to say home. Click away, move it in the right spot. You can see it's aligning with your previous panel label. And we'll do the last one. We'll do this as school. Alright, it looks like all these are aligned with each other, but there's some spacing that's a little higher. What I'll do is I'm just going to click on it and use my arrow keys to kind of get equal spacing here. You could also try to use the rulers to help with your spacing. This looks pretty good. Alright, so now we want to add the primary, secondary, and x-axis labels. What I'm going to do is just again copy and paste, and I'm just going to double click here and I'm going to type in responses per minute. In our clinic we tend to capitalize all these phase labels. Again, it's just a preference thing. You can keep it capitalized or make it different casing. Alright, so there are different ways to rotate text. You can use this little green function to rotate the text. You could use the features up here to rotate. I find the easiest way just to right click, go to rotation, and do vertical up. And we'll move this over. And this should be a slightly larger size. I'm guessing about size 24. So we'll go ahead and make it size 24. Sometimes Prism puts it on two separate lines, and to get it back on one line, you just click on these outside boxes until it makes it one line. And then you could kind of just move. And you can see this is making it centered with your middle panel, which is what we want. All right, now let's copy this. We'll paste down here. And what we'll do is we'll rotate this by right clicking and go to horizontal. We'll type in sessions and we'll just move this down to the bottom, right in the center. We'll copy this again, paste, and this is another preference thing. Some research groups keep this orientation the same for a secondary y-axis. Our research group tends to rotate this, so I'm just going to right click, rotate, and do vertical down. And we'll just double click and type in percentage of item engagement. Again, I made it 2 lines, so we'll just kind of drag this until it's 1 line. And then we'll move this over here. If you want to make sure that this is centered with this, you could just click both of them, align, and you could do middle. All right, so the last thing we need to do is add in this arrow and its arrow legend. The reason we did this is just because sometimes people prefer to do arrow legends in general. So like if we just wanted to do an arrow to say SIB, an arrow to say pica, we might do that instead of a box legend. So that's the reason we've included this here. So we'll just go ahead and we'll copy this text, paste it down here, double click and type in sick. And it looks like this text is a little smaller, so we'll just decrease the size here. It looks like about size 18. Move this over a little bit. I'm just using my arrows right now. And finally, we just need to create an arrow. So we will go to Draw and select the arrow. And you can see it created an arrow. We might have to move it around a little bit and adjust the size of it. And what you could do is just double click this like any drawing and just make sure the thickness is 1/2 point. You could also change like the style of the arrow, the direction of it if you accidentally made it backward, and just click OK. And now you should have mostly your graph complete. You might want to just double check that the range of the y-axes and the x-axes are correct, that you have all of the text that you might need as compared to your mock graph, and that the size of the text and appearance of the data points are matching your mock graph. And when you're done, what you can do is export this graph to whatever format you want by going to File, Export, and then there are all different types of file formats. My preference for exporting for PowerPoints is to use this enhanced meta file, which is typically creates high quality images from different programs on a Windows computer. But if you drop down, you can see all different types of file formats. The most common you might publish with is a PDF or an EPS, which some journals seem to prefer. And then you can choose any other formats that you might want to use, such as a JPEG, PNG, etc. And then what you can do is, say we do a PDF, you can adjust the size of the PDF and how much it's compressed. And you can choose the file name and where you want to save it, and click OK, and it will save it as that. That's the end of our tutorial. Hopefully your graph looks pretty similar to the graph we created together, and hopefully this will let you learn how to create multiple baseline, multi-element, reversal designs, combine different graph types, whether you create this complex of a graph or not. Thanks for your time.